Hi there, everyone. So I thought it was about time to check back in with the world of feminine energy dating coaching. And if you've seen a previous video that I did about Adrienne Everheart, you'll know some of the thoughts that I have about this particular style of dating coaching. And I feel as if I am entitled to speak on this topic because for a very long time, several years, possibly as much as 8 or 9 years, I was a pretty enthusiastic, if not devout follower of this particular style of dating and interacting, between men and women. And it was not exactly helpful for my dating life. I found it to be both incredibly dogmatic and also incredibly confusing. And it kind of just left me chasing my tail and going round and round in circles and really struggling to get anywhere productive in my dating life. And the reason I feel so strongly about it is that it also kind of inadvertently, this sort of advice led me into several very harmful, if not downright abusive relationships and situations with the people that I was dating. And so, what I want to do through this conversation is just to start to bring awareness to why this content is harmful, what I eventually saw as the problems inherent in this approach to dating, and how dating coaches like this one that we're going to look at, Adrienne Everheart, really capitalize on the insecurity and confusion and uncertainty of their audiences and how they really exploit the desire which many of their audience members have for a safe, loving, committed relationship, often with people who are not actually suitable partners for that sort of relationship. And how coaches like Adrienne Everheart really avoid making the connection between toxic partners and toxic relationships. They kind of perpetuate this incredibly harmful idea that you can create a perfect relationship with a very problematic partner. And so we're going to look at some of the advice which does that in order to just demonstrate what I mean. Um, so I stopped following Adrienne Everheart some time ago, but I'm still subscribed to her mailing list because I thought that her email content provided kind of great the advice in her emails provided great content to demonstrate what I mean when I talk about harmful dating coaching advice. So I still kind of read the emails for purely, I suppose, just to marvel at how bad this advice can be sometimes. And before I go any further, I just want to make it really clear I'm not a mental health professional. I am not an expert in this area, and I don't claim to be. But I do feel that my extensive experience with following coaches like Adrienne Everheart and the various results that I got from following this sort of advice do at least give me the right to speak on this topic. But if you are struggling in your romantic life and with mental health issues related to your romantic relationships, I strongly recommend speaking to a professional, a therapist who comes highly recommended and working through your issues with someone who really does know what they're talking about. Coaches like Adrienne Everheart like to present themselves as experts, but they're not. In most cases, they're either self-taught or they have some sort of coaching certification from another coach who is also not an expert in anything really. And they base their kind of expert status on the fact that they have a large following. But as we've seen with so many problematic figures in the past, just because you have a large following, it doesn't mean that you know what you're talking about or that the information that you have to share is productive or valuable or helpful to people. And so we're going to start by looking at this email that she sent through to her subscriber mailing list. And if we have time, we'll look at a second email that I received from her mailing list as well. But this one I thought was particularly interesting. So we'll read it together. It's entitled, What to Do When Your Man is Pulling Away. Now, already the title of this email bothers me intensely. And I know that might make me seem kind of overly sensitive, but really, what to do when your man is pulling away? That's a really, if you've ever been in that situation, had a partner pulling away from you, seemingly for no reason or for a reason that doesn't really make sense to you, it's an incredibly difficult and devastating position to be in. I have been in that position more often than I probably like to admit. And if you are someone who suffers from anxiety or any sort of mental health challenges, being in that sort of position where the person that you really thought you could depend on, who you thought you could count on, and who was your best friend, your part of your support network, when they just start pulling away from you and avoiding you and not communicating with you in what seems to be a really random way, this is an incredibly triggering and devastating thing. And it really bothers me when coaches like Adrienne Everheart kind of make light of it and make it seem as if it's just this cute little dating problem that can be fixed just with a little email and a few tips and tricks. And they exploit people in this sort of position with promises that they can turn the situation around and get you out of what is an incredibly dark and difficult and heartbreaking place to be in. And in my opinion and experience, they never provide the sort of advice which a person in that situation really needs. They always provide advice that tends to aggrandize themselves and isn't primarily focused on helping the person who is in that situation. So we'll see that in this email. So let's continue reading. What to do when your man is pulling away. It can feel scary when a man suddenly needs space or acts distant. Yes, incredibly scary. And as I said, if you are someone who suffers from anxiety or mental health challenges, any kind of mental health issues that make you fragile and particularly vulnerable during times like this, if your partner just randomly withdraws their support and their company and their love, that is a very dark and scary and even kind of hopeless place to be in. And I speak from experience. So she says, Dear Diamond Girls, now that's what Adrienne Everheart kind of calls her followers. With many of my coaching clients, our inner boy or masculine energy takes over and wants to manage a man, especially when he asks for space or gets distant. Now, I'm not going to go into a whole long thesis of what she means by inner boy or masculine energy, but I'm going to just try and sum it up in a couple of sentences. She has this philosophy that we all have masculine and feminine energy inside ourselves and that they're responsible for different kinds of behaviors. And she characterizes behaviors very kind of distinctly into masculine type behaviors and feminine type behaviors. And this is where a lot of the confusion and quite frankly, like just insanity of this sort of advice comes in. I mean, it's really random when you think about it, but she kind of calls behaviors that are really proactive and about kind of taking action and taking the initiative and wanting to solve problems as being masculine type behaviors, and being feminine and is described as being kind of more passive and more sort of being in the moment and feeling and receiving kind of behaviors. And she doesn't disguise the fact that she heavily promotes feminine in her kind of idea of what feminine energy behaviors are. She promotes women acting that way and not acting in masculine energy type ways, which she kind of regularly demonizes and blames as being the reason for a lot of relationship problems. So she starts that off right at the very beginning of the email. So she says, I admit this was a big issue for me. My inner boy wanted to swoop in and solve whatever was going on and put my counseling training to use. I had no idea that Adrienne Everheart had any sort of counseling training. I strongly suspect that her counseling training is not actually formal education in counseling, but it's probably refers more to her coaching type of training, which is not actual real counseling training, just to be clear. But yeah, I mean, it is very normal when something like this happens, when there's a problem in your relationship, to want to solve the problem. I mean, I think that's very natural and there's nothing wrong with that. Clearly, if your partner is just suddenly pulled away from you for something that doesn't really make sense to you, that is a problem. That's a break from the norm. Why wouldn't you want to step in and solve that? And she's going to kind of explain to us why we shouldn't be doing that. All right. So this is already really upsetting me to see this kind of thing. But we're just going to try to get through this email together. And then I'm very keen to hear what you all think of this sort of advice. I wanted things to go back to normal with my guy, including cuddles, love, and time together. Well, who wouldn't want that? Isn't that kind of what the point of being in a relationship is? And then she says, I did not understand the value in separation desire, which is the opposite of separation anxiety. Separation desire, is that a real thing? Can someone who is more kind of well-versed in psychology and perhaps qualified in psychology let me know whether separation desire is real? I know that there are many types of people and personalities which like to have time on their own. At times, I am quite an introverted, sensitive person, and for many reasons, I enjoy having regular time on my own. I find it to be very calming. I find it to be really good for my mental health. I find that it helps with overwhelm and stress, and it helps to kind of just center me and return me to a feeling of peace and well-being. And so I incorporate plenty of alone time into my life. But I think that's something very different from just randomly pulling away from your partner. Personally, what I regard as a healthy way to separate and take time for yourself is to be communicative, which is what I do with my fiance when I feel like having time on my own. And by the way, he also needs time on his own regularly. He's also introverted. So we generally will just tell each other that that's what we need. We don't just withdraw from one another in some kind of cold and hurtful way. We have an understanding in our relationship that both of us need alone time at times. And so if we want time by ourselves, it's not a big deal. I don't really understand why it has to be this big separation and desire, and why you can't do it in a respectful and loving way. It doesn't need to be this, this devastating thing that you do to your partner. Then she goes on to say, and yes, I coined that term, separation desire. Okay, so it's not a real psychology term. She's just made it up. Okay. Separation desire is the natural need for autonomy. Well, autonomy and being separated are not really the same thing, not technically anyway. Separation is about breaking away from people, and autonomy is about having independence and being able to make your own decisions, which is different from being separate or alone. But I suppose they can be related. People can find it more difficult to exercise their own independent choices and sense of self, I suppose, when they're around other people. It can be easier to do that when you're on your own, but they're not exactly the same thing. But here is where we get into real problematic territory. She says, for men, autonomy allows them to think and process their feelings. Women need to talk their feelings out in most cases. Now, I just got done telling you a little bit earlier that I'm someone who needs regular time alone in order to process my feelings. And I would venture to guess that there are plenty of women like that, plenty of people like that. Why does it have to be this distinction between men and women, that men need autonomy and time alone to think and process their feelings, and they need time away from the relationship, but women need to talk out their feelings? Like, yes, I think there's a time and place for both genders. Sometimes I like talking out my feelings and sometimes I don't. This really black and white way of painting men and women truly bothers me, not only because it really sells both men and women short, but because it's just totally inaccurate. She doesn't know what she's talking about. This is just her own personal philosophy, and she's painting it as truth and fact. Okay, so then she goes on to say, can you see the feminine and masculine clash here? Men need space to think, and women need someone to share their feelings. So I suppose in this paradigm, Adrienne, men don't feel and women don't think. Is that what you're telling us here? I mean, I'm so cross. I don't even know how to put into words how ridiculous I find this. So then she says, did you know men chemically need time away from a woman to recharge their testosterone? Sources for that, Adrienne? I've heard her say this before. Men chemically need time away from women to recharge their testosterone. But I've never heard her provide any kind of reliable or scientific evidence for that statement. Again, it's just something that she thinks, and she's presenting it as fact. And she says, also, guys can get grumpy and introverted at times. I can get grumpy and introverted at times, and I'm not a guy, and I know plenty of other women who are exactly like that as well. This is not a gendered issue. Men and women, people in general, sometimes get grumpy and introverted. Introverts in particular get introverted and can get grumpy if they're forced to spend too much time around people. They need time on their own to recharge. This is not a male-female issue. I feel like I'm going to be saying this about 20 or 30 times in this video. Then she says, men need feelings of freedom and some silence to feel like the man again. Women also need feelings of freedom and some silence. And Adrienne, I'd love you to explain what feel like the man again means, because that seems like a complete load of nonsense and very vague, confusing, and problematic expression that could easily be twisted. So then we have a little advert for her Master Your Magnetism podcast with Helena Hart, who's another feminine energy dating coach. And she says, my dear friend and coach Helena Hart has an amazing podcast episode where we discuss accidentally pushing a man away. So in this scenario where the man has pulled away, are you saying that sometimes women can actually be the cause of that? Even though he's a grown adult person who's chosen to pull away from you instead of communicating with you, women can sometimes be to blame for that. Is that what you're saying without coming out and saying it in so many words, Adrienne? So then she says, when you lean back, you get much needed clarity. Now let's have a quick explanation of what leaning back is in the whole feminine energy dating coaching world. I spoke about how coaches like Adrienne believe that feminine energy behaviors are more passive. They're about receiving and about not taking action. And so they have a term for that called leaning back, which basically just means kind of staying still and not doing anything. When you're leaning back, you can respond, but you can't initiate. And that goes for communications, behaviors. You're not supposed to initiate texts and phone calls or conversations or do things for a man. You can respond and you can thank him for doing things, but you're not supposed to do anything yourself. That's, in a nutshell, that's what leaning back is. And feminine energy dating coaches are all about leaning back. They think it's the most wonderful thing ever. If you've ever tried to put leaning back into practice, you will know that it is absolutely unmitigated, unadulterated torture to have to do nothing in a relationship where you are supposed to be an equal partner, where you're supposed to be 50% of it, where you are just as invested as the other person, and yet you feel hogtied and as if you can't actually take any action in the relationship. It's ridiculous. It's mental torture, it's emotional torture, and to top it all off, it's completely ineffective and it doesn't work except in the short term. So anyway, she loves to tout the benefits of leaning back, but I can honestly tell you, as someone who practiced leaning back or tried to practice it to the best of my ability for years, it is a load of absolute garbage. So she says, when you lean back, you get much needed clarity. Well, I suppose in some sense, when you don't do anything, it gives you more time to think and more time to assess the situation. So perhaps it could give you clarity in that sense. But I don't see why you can't get clarity and think about things without being this wallflower, passive kind of person who's too afraid to speak or do anything. Anyway, she says, years ago, I was dating a man that I felt could be the one. Yet he often behaved aloofly and could be the classic hot and cold type of man. I never felt secure for very long and it felt awful. Okay, so she's at least acknowledging that that kind of thing feels awful when a partner pulls away from you at times. And if you are in a relationship that feels like that, that's characterized by someone who behaves this way, this hot and cold nonsense, I'm not going to mince my words. You need to just leave that relationship. That is a relationship that's harmful. I'm not saying that that relationship can't heal and possibly get better over time if the person grows up and works through their issues. But actually staying stuck in that situation is torture. It's awful. It's mentally harmful. It's damaging to your self-esteem. It's damaging to your mental health. You need to get far away from someone who is behaving that way. So then she says, even though I was extremely scared to honor his need for space and have radio silence between us, I knew that inching forward only pushed him away. Well, that's true. If you have someone who's pulling away, the last thing that you want to do, or the last thing that's going to be well received, is to go forward towards them. And yet, that in itself should tell you how destructive and dysfunctional that relationship is. You should be able to talk to your partner when you need to. You should have the sort of relationship where you feel safe and comfortable enough to have conversations with your partner and to get your needs met. If you have a person who's behaving this way, who is pushed even, who pulls away from you and then pulls away even further when you try to talk to them, that should be a giant, like flashing neon sign that that relationship is not healthy. How can that kind of relationship ever bring you satisfaction, honestly? So then she says, I knew in my heart that I did not want to pursue a man to get love or attention. Well, no, you should never do that with anyone. If a person whom you should be spending your time with should be freely and willingly giving love and attention to you. You shouldn't be having to beg for it or pursue someone for it or be scared of your, talking to them, pushing them away, this sort of thing. That's a bad relationship. And I know that because I've been in numerous relationships like that, and I'm not anymore. Then she says, I felt so vulnerable that first night, leaning back and not texting him to check in. Well, of course. Why wouldn't you feel vulnerable? Being able to text someone to check in is a perfectly normal, natural, healthy thing to do in a relationship. And if you feel like you can't do that, of course you're going to feel vulnerable. Of course you're going to feel like something is wrong because something is wrong. That's not balanced. That's not normal. To feel that way. But she's painting it like it's a really good thing. She says, my first night without his call, cuddles, or time together left me crying in the shower and feeling abandoned. Your relationship should not make you feel that way. I feel like a stuck record at this point, but no good relationship makes you feel that way. Crying and feeling abandoned. A good partner doesn't do this sort of thing to you. I can say that for a fact. They don't. Not without a really good reason anyway, and she's just painting this person as someone who just randomly pulled away from her for no reason. It's not like they've had a big fight or like she's done something awful or like something really big has happened in his life. He's just randomly pulled away from her and left her crying and feeling abandoned. But watch how she paints the situation. It's really interesting and it's really damaging in my opinion. She says, I decided to care for my diamond girl self with a hair treatment, mask, body scrub, and moisturizer. I went to bed feeling a new connection with myself. I mean, those are great things to do. Self-care is wonderful, but you can do self-care anytime. You don't have to wait till you're feeling like absolute shit in order to do self-care. You don't need to wait until you're feeling completely devastated and desperate um, to take care of yourself. And you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be using self-care as a balm to try and cover up feelings of heartbreak and devastation because your partner is treating you badly. Then she says, the next day, instead of checking my phone every other minute, I turned my phone off completely for 3 hours. Well, that's not normal either. I mean, why should you have to do that just to feel okay in a relationship, just to try and forget about the situation? You know, having to turn your phone off for hours on end just so you can escape the reality that your partner is pulling away from you and isn't texting or phoning you. She says, at first I was panicked to do so, but I soon found freedom in not checking in and being tethered. I didn't do this to punish the man. I did this to gain my freedom and learn to support myself emotionally. Okay, I have some thoughts. Having a break from technology can be a wonderful thing. But in my opinion, it should be done from a place of, consciously and intentionally taking a break from technology, and not because you feel so sad and heartbroken that your partner is not texting you. That is not the kind of technology break that I really think is healthy. And it just makes me feel really sad for her at this time in her life, and also for other women who might be reading this and thinking this is great advice, to think that they feel the need to escape from technology just so they can escape the reality that their partner is pulling away from them. And it can kind of, speaking as someone who's been in that situation and speaking from experience, what can happen is when you do turn your phone back on again or your computer back on again, is there can be almost a sense of intensity around it, which is not normal or natural. Either your partner that you haven't heard from in ages still hasn't contacted you, and you turn on your phone and you can feel this real sense of devastation or anticlimax even, that there's no message from that person. Or they have messaged you and you feel this incredible sense of elation and these high highs just from getting like a simple, hey, how are you text message from someone. And it can kind of blow the whole situation way out of proportion. It's introducing an imbalance into that relationship, which I don't believe is healthy. And again, I'm not an expert, but I am someone who has lived through this sort of situation many times myself. And this is no longer my reality. My fiance doesn't behave like this. And it's a totally different feeling in our relationship. I'm not obsessively checking my phone to see whether he's messaged me. I don't have to, because my partner is someone who's really consistent and loving and would never just pull away from me for no reason or without telling me. And so I'm not having to pull these sorts of antics and do this kind of mental and emotional gymnastics with myself. Let me know what you guys think. So she says, to my surprise, letting go and leaning back worked in an amazing self-growth way. My vibe shifted into feelings of freedom and confidence. Things in life began to turn around for me quickly. New opportunities opened up and I returned to my healthy routine. Now, what she doesn't say is that this particular relationship that she's talking about here, that she had to kind of pull away from herself just in order to take care of herself and to feel okay again. She speaks about this relationship often, this ex-boyfriend of hers. And this is an incredibly damaging and unhealthy and toxic relationship that ended in a very, very, very painful way. And yet she's choosing to focus on one little microcosm of this relationship in order to try and give advice about what to do in a situation like that, and completely ignoring the larger context that this was a bad relationship. And in my opinion, things like this, if your partner is just pulling away from you for no reason and leaving you feeling abandoned and devastated and crying in the shower, that is a clear sign of a bad relationship, and you should take it as such. You shouldn't kind of be looking for ways to limp your way through situations like this in order, and trying to get yourself to feel okay again. I mean, yes, I understand relationships like that can be very difficult to break away from, but part of healing is recognizing the dysfunction, as difficult as it might be. And yet what she's doing here is giving women kind of tools like a band-aid to just plaster over a bad situation and to keep limping along through a relationship like this, and to kind of blame themselves for not being cool enough or not being respectful enough of a man's need for space. It's so warped and twisted. And then she says, I felt good about myself instead of having feelings of being set aside, and I stopped obsessing over a man who was not available. I let go of trying to control the relationship. This doesn't mean forgoing my boundaries or core relationship values. In fact, I was taking care of me, which is a primary feminine energy value. And as I've already said, I don't actually see this as true self-care. I don't see this as really taking care of yourself. Those self-care activities that she mentioned were sparked by a man's problematic and cold and uncaring behavior, which, that's not true self-care. That's you just trying to survive through a painful and devastating and abnormal situation. That's my perspective on it. It's you can't continue like that. You can't go through a whole relationship with someone who is hot and cold by doing that sort of thing. It's each time it happens, it wicks away more and more at your sense of security in the relationship, and at your sense of self, and at your sense of being able to feel safe and loved in that relationship, which is why I don't call it true self-care. She says, 4 days dragged past with no sign of this man I had been regularly dating. I worried if leaning back pushed him away. Do you see that? Do you see how she's blaming herself? Or was this his passive way of breaking up with me? Someone who breaks up with you like that is not a good person. They're, at the very least, they're not a good partner for you. You should be looking for someone who has healthy communication skills, because healthy communication is essential in a good relationship. She says, the waiting and limbo had felt like solitary confinement, and solitary confinement is inhumane. Well, I completely agree with her there. I think that might be the truest statement that she's made in this whole email. It is inhumane for a partner to do this to you. And do you see this contradiction that, we see playing out here? On the one hand, she says she felt these feelings of freedom and confidence, and she was taking care of herself and taking back her power and not being dependent on having to hear from a man. And in the next breath, she says that what she was going through was actually inhumane. So this is where the confusion and the contradiction comes in, and why women who try to follow this sort of advice can feel like they're chasing their tails and like they don't know which way is up or down. And this can go on for years and years and years. So she says, so I decided to no longer punish myself for the man's actions or inaction. I decided if I didn't hear back in 24 hours, I was single and back to quantum dating others. I had my script prepared to send to Mr. Hot and Cold. By the way, as far as I know, quantum dating is just her way of saying you're dating more than one person. So you're not exclusive with someone. Which, I mean, she doesn't say whether this guy was her boyfriend or whether they were in a relationship, but I would hope that you wouldn't become exclusive with a man who behaves this way. That sounds like torture to me. She says, I sent the following text. Hello, I miss connecting with you. I understand you need some time, yet I'm unsure where we stand. Part of dating is learning how to solve conflict. If we aren't on the same page, I'm going to be moving on. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that text exactly, except I think it's a little bit passive aggressive. She says that she understands he needs time. I don't know. I don't really understand why someone would need to do that when they're dating someone or in a relationship with someone. It doesn't really make sense to me why they can't just tell you what they need and have a conversation with you. And so, I think she's being a little passive aggressive. I probably wouldn't send a text exactly like that, but at least she says that, she doesn't know if they're on the same page, and she's expressing her unhappiness about the situation and telling him that she's going to be moving on. And that's a good thing, I think. So she says, I never heard back from this man and I was fine with that. Yes, it stung to be rejected, but I was proud of taking ownership of my life instead of that awful limbo feeling. With practice, I got acclimated to enjoying some space from the man in my life. At first it was simple because reuniting felt so good. Then my connection to life outside of my relationship deepened. I just want to make it super clear. You don't have to have a man who pulls away from you regularly in order to have a good relationship with yourself, and in order to regularly take time by yourself to do self-care or to follow your own hobbies and interests, or to just enjoy being on your own. You can do that within the boundaries of a healthy relationship. And I would venture to say that in a healthy relationship, that is the sort of thing that can be negotiated quite easily and comfortably. And it makes your time by yourself that much more valuable because you're not spending it eaten up with heartbreak and anxiety. You know that you're still within the safety of that relationship. And that's, this is how it feels for me. I don't have to spend my time alone, my alone time, which is very important to me. I don't have to spend it filled with agony and sadness and uncertainty and doubt, and my thoughts being consumed of what's going on with the person I'm in a relationship with. And that's how, a good alone time should feel calming and comfortable and safe. And you should be able to indulge in self-care activities without being, consumed with fear and anxiety over your relationship. And I just really hope that for those of you who do enjoy taking time on your own, that you don't feel like it's something you're being forced to do because your partner is pulling away from you. I would hope that it's something that you get to choose consciously and proactively for yourself, and that you're able to feel good doing it. Everyone deserves that, in my opinion. So the email goes on to say, in my future relationship, the more comfortable I got with my world and with my life, the more my man wanted to be around me. Now, do you see again how she's subtly shifting the blame to the woman? And she's saying, oh, well, kind of without directly saying it, she's implying that if your man doesn't want to be around you, if he's pulling away from you, maybe it's because you don't have enough going on in your own life. And again, that's just so twisted and warped. Partner who just pulls away from you for no reason, without communicating properly with you, without negotiating that with you, you should never take the blame for that. You should never feel as if that is your fault. And you should never feel as if it's your responsibility to somehow kind of lure them back by plumping up your own life and having more going on in your own life. This is another narrative that she loves to push. The fact that women are supposed to become these kind of very alluring, inviting beings that men are supposed to want to be around because we have just so much going on in our own life and we're just so happy on our own that men just can't resist being around us. And this is another one of those times that she's painting this as a way that you can cause a toxic partner to possibly become less toxic. And that's just not the case. That's completely untrue. If someone has these sorts of issues where they pull away from the relationship and can't properly commit and they can't communicate with you in a healthy way, you can't fix that. And you shouldn't feel as if that is your problem or your fault or your responsibility to fix. And so, yeah, I mean, I stayed trapped in that kind of mindset for a long time. And that's why it makes me so cross and upset to see this sort of advice being perpetuated. She says, interesting how leaning back works. Here are a few tools I practice. I made sure to speak less at times and allow for some silence so my guy could have space to speak. Excuse me, paging 1955. Women are supposed to speak less so that a man has space to speak. This is just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. I know plenty of guys who are really talkative and, they have no problem being heard when they want to be heard. A man is not a small child who can't speak up for himself. This is bullshit. I'm sorry, but it just is. I made plans with my friends and family to give him breaks to recharge. Well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Incorporating time away from the relationship, as I said, it can be enjoyable and healthy to do that. But don't do it purely so that the other person will kind of love you or be attracted to you more. I don't think that's healthy. It should come from an authentic desire to do those things. If you want to spend time with your family and friends or do things on your own, you should do those, but don't do it to try and manipulate some sort of response from your partner where they will want to come close to you again. I mean, it can have that effect, but I don't think that should be the reason that we're doing it, because then you're just trying to control your partner, and it kind of tells you that there's some sort of unhealthy dynamic creeping in there. She goes on to say, I developed my life and personality away from the relationship. He was keenly interested in what I was doing too. I praised the good in our relationship and nitpicked for perfection less. All of these things led to my happily ever after. Okay. Before I became happily married to Jeff, I made many changes to my lifestyle. I encourage you to find things you enjoy solo. This enriches your life and gives the man time to recharge and miss you. Okay, I've already addressed that. Yes, it is worth developing yourself as a person outside of the relationship and a person in your own right. And hopefully you have things that make you and that you enjoy doing on your own. If not, it's just something to think about. Don't feel as if you have to. But don't do it to make a man miss you, and don't do it out of some outdated idea that a man needs to recharge his testosterone by being away from you. If he wants that, he should tell you, or maybe you can ask him. You don't need to assume that just because a coach like Adrienne Everheart tells you that that's what men need. If I think that my fiance might need time on his own, I ask him. And he'll say either, yeah, I'm just going to play a game on my own, a computer game on my own, or I'm just going to, uh, mess around with my tools in the workshop, or he'll say, no, I don't need time on my own. If you want to sit with me, that's perfectly fine. But it's this whole kind of idea that men and women are these mysterious creatures that neither of us can fully understand, and we have to have all this subterfuge and all these secrets from each other, and that we need coaches like Adrienne Everheart to help us make sense of it all. It's just such nonsense. That's what I really, really think, now that I'm in a healthy, balanced relationship myself. But I'm really keen to know what you guys think. Whatever your opinions are, do you agree with Adrienne's advice? Do you not agree? Which parts did you find harmful or ridiculous? Were there any parts that you found to be particularly helpful? You don't have to agree with me, of course. If this sort of advice is useful to you, then I'm not here to take that away from you. I personally think it's nonsense, and I think that it's worth talking about. But yeah, let me know what you think. And I'll see you next time. We might look at the other email that I got from Adrienne Everheart in the last few days in the next video. Or I might talk about a different dating coach. I'll just see how I feel. Okay, have a great evening, everyone. Bye.